The Galaxian Trade Council was laughing. It was a sound like grinding stones and whistling gas, the collective mirth of 12 different apex species. "You sold it to them?" High Merchant Krell asked, his 4 eyes blinking in disbelief. "The Sol Sector's moon? The one that's literally a hollowed-out, resource-dry, gray rock?" "Not sold, Krell," laughed the Zorgon ambassador. "We scammed them. We traded that dead rock for 30% of their planet's atmospheric gold reserves. We told them it was a strategic observation post. The humans actually signed the deed with smiles on their faces." The Zorgon projected a map. It showed Earth and its lonely gray satellite. To the Council, the moon was garbage. No minerals, no atmosphere, no tactical value. "They are a primitive, sentimental race," Krell sneered. "They probably wanted it back for the poetry. Let them have their dead rock. By the time they realize they've traded their wealth for a tomb, our fleet will be 2 sectors away." But back on that dead rock, the atmosphere wasn't one of mourning. It was one of activation. Deep beneath the lunar surface, in chambers the Zorgons never bothered to scan because they knew nothing was there, a light flickered to life. It wasn't a human light. It was something much, much older. General Miller stood in the center of the lunar vault. He looked at the deed in his hand. The legal ownership of the moon returned to Earth at last. "Sir," a technician whispered, trembling. "The transaction is verified. The moon is legally ours again. We have full sovereign rights to activate the guest." Miller nodded. "The Council thought they scammed us into buying a graveyard. They didn't realize we weren't buying a rock. We were buying back a cage." For 6 months, the Zorgons gloated. They used the gold they'd taken from Earth to fund a new invasion fleet. They planned to return to Sol, not to trade, but to conquer. Why would they want the moon? Krell wondered aloud one day, looking at the long-range scans. They've moved 3 million people there. They're building something, but there are no factories, no shipyards. "It doesn't matter," the Zorgon admiral replied. "We have their gold. We have their resources. When we arrive, we will blast that moon into dust just to show them how worthless their purchase was." But as the Zorgon fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Sol system, something was wrong. The stars weren't where they should be. The light was bending. On the moon, the gray dust was vibrating.
"General Vance," the technician said into his headset, "the Zorgon fleet has arrived. 15,000 dreadnoughts. They've begun charging their primary weapons." "Good," Vance replied from the Lunar Command Center. "They're right where we need them. Release the Void Seal. Let the guest see the stars again." The moon didn't explode. It didn't fire a laser. It inhaled. The Zorgon fleet felt the pull first. It wasn't gravity. It was a hunger. On every sensor screen in the alien fleet, the moon began to change. The gray rock didn't crack. It began to dissolve like an illusion. Beneath the dust wasn't metal or machines. It was an entity of pure, localized entropy, a living singularity that humanity had found drifting in the void eons ago and had caged using the moon as a dampening field. "Admiral, the moon it's a living eye," the Zorgon navigator screamed. And indeed, a massive swirling iris of black fire and purple lightning had opened on the lunar surface. This was the something worse. Humanity hadn't been guarding a base. They had been the jailers of a god-killer. "Protocol, feed," Miller commanded. The entity reached out, not with arms, but with tendrils of distorted space-time. One of the Zorgon dreadnoughts, a ship a mile long, was caught in a tendril. In a heartbeat, the ship didn't explode. It was simply erased. It turned into a thin ribbon of light and was pulled into the moon's eye. "Engines to maximum!" Krell screamed, his arrogance replaced by a primal, soul-crushing terror. "Get us out of Sol!" "You can't leave," Miller's voice cut across their comms. It was cold. "The deed you signed included a non-interference clause for the moon's local space. You're trespassing on a feeding ground." The battle, if you could call it that, lasted 4 minutes. The 15,000 ships of the Zorgon Armada weren't destroyed by missiles. They were consumed. Every scrap of metal, every drop of fuel, and every screaming soul was pulled into the dead moon. With every ship it consumed, the moon grew brighter, its surface smoothing out into a perfect, terrifying sphere of black glass. Back on the Galaxian Trade Council, the laughter had stopped. The screens showed only static where a fleet used to be. General Miller appeared on the main view screen of the council. He wasn't wearing a combat suit. He was wearing a business suit. "We'd like to thank you for the moon," Miller said, leaning back in his chair. "We've been trying to find a way to feed the guest for centuries, but we couldn't afford the biomass. Your scam gave us exactly what we needed, a fleet of high-density energy to keep the entity satisfied for another 1,000 years." He smiled, and it was scarier than the moon eye. "Since you sold us the moon so cheaply, we're interested in buying Mars next. Do you want to try to scam us again, or are we done playing games?" The council didn't answer. They couldn't. They were too busy recalculating every trade deal they had ever made with the primitive humans. The dead moon returned to its gray, rocky state. The eye closed. The guest went back to sleep. But the galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity doesn't buy things because they are foolish. They buy them because they know exactly what's buried inside.